notice how some people disappear right when things start to get close? I mean really close, emotionally, spiritually, vulnerably close. 1 minute they're laughing with you, opening up just a little, and then suddenly they vanish, cold, silent, unreachable. It feels personal. It feels like rejection. But I want to challenge that belief tonight, because when we're dealing with avoidant attachment, disappearance isn't always dismissal. Sometimes it's a deeply disguised signal of emotional engagement. A clue, a symptom, a secret form of love, camouflaged as withdrawal. Avoidants don't fall in love the way secure people do. They fall in love defensively. Their first instinct isn't to pull closer, it's to retreat. Not because they don't feel, quite the opposite. It's because they feel too much, too fast, and their nervous system doesn't know how to hold that intimacy without interpreting it as a threat. Love becomes a psychological battlefield. Connection becomes pressure. Vulnerability becomes danger. So what do? They run. But it's not random. When an avoidant is secretly in love with you, their disappearing acts start to change. They're no longer just cutting you off to breathe. They're starting to time their absence. You'll notice they vanish when you start to gain power in the dynamic. When you stop chasing, when you stop explaining yourself, when you start pulling back, suddenly they feel that shift in your energy, and their silence isn't about freedom anymore. It's surveillance, it's emotional strategy. They're watching to see how long you'll last without them, and eventually, like clockwork, they reappear. They don't reach out with a romantic monologue. No, avoidants are subtle. They'll send a meme, a how have you been, a breadcrumb. But make no mistake, this is not casual. This is a signal flare. Because now they're not just avoiding intimacy, they're avoiding the pain of losing you. That tiny, insignificant check-in, that's them panicking. That's them realizing you're no longer orbiting their world. That's love dressed up in disguise, trying not to get caught. You see, an avoidant doesn't operate on the surface. Everything they do has a subconscious motive. And when they start reappearing in predictable cycles, especially right when you start detaching, it's because their internal radar is lighting up. They are emotionally attached, but their conditioning is fighting to keep them emotionally safe. So what do? They ping you, not to reconnect fully, but to reset the emotional rhythm. They want to know, are you still available? Am I still in control? Do I still matter to you, even if I won't say I need you? And here's where it gets really deep. Their withdrawal isn't about you, it's about their fear of being seen. True intimacy requires being known. And for an avoidant, being known feels like being exposed. So they self-sabotage, they vanish right when connection becomes real. But the fact that they return, not just once, but in patterned, emotionally charged intervals, tells you something profound. They're not done with you. They can't be. You've touched something in them they've spent a lifetime guarding. And now they're trying to manage the intensity of that impact without completely unraveling. So when you start seeing those timed reappearances, especially when you've gone quiet, don't chase them. Observe. Stay centered. The reappearance isn't just contact, it's confirmation. It means you're living in their mind even when their mouth is silent. It means you've triggered something real, and now they're trying to suppress what's rising. Because the truth is, avoidants fall in love backwards. First they feel it, then they fear it, then they run, then they watch, and finally when the silence starts to hurt more than the vulnerability, they inch back, not to give you clarity, but to relieve their anxiety, to see if you're still within emotional reach. Don't mistake those check-ins as weakness. Don't dismiss them either. Read them for what they are, quiet confessions, strategic signals, a silent war between avoidance and desire. Because when an avoidant starts timing their distance and reappearance, that's not distance anymore. That's a love too big for their nervous system to handle. And the more you understand that, the more power you take back from the confusion. Because love that's hidden is still love. But when it starts leaking through behavior, the game changes. Let's talk about something most people miss when dealing with avoidance. You're so busy watching their words, or the lack of them, that you forget to pay attention to what their behavior is actually screaming. And one of the most revealing yet overlooked signs that an avoidant is falling in love is this: they begin to mirror you. And I'm not just talking about copying your favorite music or picking up your slang. I'm talking about deep, unconscious mirroring. They start to match your energy, your rhythm, even your emotional cadence. They text when you text. They lean in when you lean in. They show interest in the things you're passionate about, not because they're trying to manipulate you, but because on a subconscious level, they're synchronizing with you. That's a powerful biological response to emotional bonding. And here's where it gets fascinating. As soon as they notice that they're mirroring you, when they become consciously aware of how aligned they're becoming, they panic. They pull back. They hit the emotional brakes. Why? Because for someone with avoidant attachment, mirroring means merging, and merging means vulnerability. Suddenly, they're not just going through the motions, they're feeling something. And feeling something, for them, is a threat. Avoidants have spent their lives building internal systems to protect themselves from emotional dependency. Their greatest fear is being engulfed, consumed, or lost in someone else's emotional world. So when they catch themselves imitating you, thinking about you when they wake up, reacting to your silence, craving your validation, it's like a glitch in the matrix. They don't know how to process that level of attachment. So what do? They pull away, cold, fast, almost mechanical. But don't be fooled by the sudden distance. The mirroring didn't stop because the feelings disappeared. The mirroring stopped because the feelings got too real. They're terrified of losing control. Think about that. People don't panic when they're indifferent. Panic is a sign of investment, of fear rooted in care. So when an avoidant mirrors you and then suddenly pulls away, you're witnessing the internal war between love and self-protection. That retreat is not rejection, it's defense. Let's break it down even deeper. In psychology, mirroring is one of the most primal bonding mechanisms. Infants mirror their caregivers. Lovers mirror each other's body language, tone, breath. It creates connection on a neurological level. So when an avoidant starts mirroring you, it means you're bypassing their defense systems. You're reaching a part of them that doesn't know how to fake it. You're waking up something real, and real scares the hell out of them. But here's what most people get wrong. They interpret that retreat as a sign they did something wrong. They start overanalyzing, overcompensating, chasing. And all that does is reinforce the avoidance fear. See, intimacy leads to chaos. I need to pull back even more. Instead, what you need to understand is that pullback is confirmation. It's emotional evidence that your presence has made impact. And impact is the first sign of unconscious love. When someone starts losing their emotional neutrality around you, when their cool becomes inconsistent, when their boundaries start bending, when they reflect your words back to you without realizing it, they're not indifferent, they're invaded, emotionally penetrated. You're in their psyche. And once you're in, they can't unfeel you, no matter how far they run. So the key is not to chase the mirroring or react to the pullback. The key is to stay grounded. Don't lose your center just because they lost theirs. When they mirror and panic, let them. That's the only way they learn that love doesn't have to mean loss of control, that it's safe to feel, that mirroring someone isn't surrendering your soul, it's connecting without losing identity. The moment you recognize this pattern for what it is, a hidden language of love trying to survive behind fear, you stop personalizing their chaos and you start seeing your power in the dynamic. Because emotional reflection followed by fear isn't rejection. It's evidence. Evidence that love has entered the system. The system doesn't know how to hold it. You ever sit across from someone who's giving you all the right words, but something about the energy feels off? They're calm, composed, logical, but underneath it you feel tension, hesitation, emotion bleeding through the cracks. That's exactly what happens when an avoidant starts catching real feelings. They won't confess it. They won't dramatize it. They'll explain it, rationalize it, wrap it in logic. But if you listen with more than your ears, you'll hear what they're not saying. You'll hear the love they're trying to hide. Avoidants don't operate in the emotional dimension the way others do. They live in the world of control, of measured responses, of emotional self-containment. Love, real love, threatens that system. It destabilizes the internal structure they've spent years building to survive. So when feelings start to rise, they don't show them directly, they explain them away. They throw logic at you like a shield. I'm just not ready for a relationship right now. I have a lot going on. I don't want to hurt you. On the surface, it sounds rational, respectable even. But if you know how to read between the lines, if you've been listening with your intuition instead of just your intellect, you'll recognize the deeper truth. Their voice might be saying, I'm not available, but their eyes, their pauses, their tone, all of that is whispering something else. I'm feeling more than I know how to handle. That contradiction is not accidental. It's psychological warfare between what they feel and what they fear. You see, an avoidant will build an entire fortress of reason to avoid the chaos of emotion. But the moment they start feeling love, the cracks in that fortress begin to show. Their sentences become vague, their body language shifts, they pause more, they speak with less certainty. Why? Because for the first time, the words don't align with the experience. They're saying one thing, but living another. That's not deception, that's emotional dissonance. And this is where most people misunderstand them. They take the logic at face value, they believe the excuses, they walk away thinking it was never real. But if you look closer, if you observe without reacting, you'll realize something powerful. They were protecting themselves, not rejecting you. They were trying to process love in the only language they trust. Let's take this even deeper. Philosophically, love is chaos to the avoidant. It's unpredictable, non-linear, and requires surrender. And surrender feels like death to someone who equates closeness with danger. So when love shows up, they try to categorize it, analyze it, make sense of it. But love isn't something you make sense of, it's something you feel. And that's the problem. Feeling terrifies them because feeling means exposure. Feeling means risk. So what happens? They intellectualize it. They start giving you reasons instead of emotions. They talk about timing, distance, circumstance. But the more they talk, the more you feel what they're not saying. You hear the tension in their voice. You sense the regret behind the restraint. You witness a person trying to stay in control while silently unraveling. That unraveling, that's the sign. That's how you know love has entered the equation. You have to become fluent in emotional contradiction. Avoidants don't say, I love you. They say, I don't want to hold you back. You deserve better. Or I need space. And then look at you like they hope you don't believe it. Their love doesn't come wrapped in declarations. It comes through tension, through avoidance, through logic failing to hide emotion. But here's the key. Don't confront it. Don't argue with their logic. That only reinforces the walls. Instead, observe, stay calm, let them sit in their emotional dissonance. Because the truth is, when logic begins to tremble under the weight of unspoken emotion, you've already reached them. You've impacted something they don't know how to name yet. And that's the beginning of transformation, not for you, but for them. So next time they give you a perfectly rehearsed explanation for why they can't love you, listen deeper, watch closer. Because sometimes the most honest thing an avoidant ever says is in what they couldn't say. When logic trembles, love is trying to speak. Don't miss it. Let's talk about what happens when silence starts to hurt the avoidant more than connection ever did. See, most people assume avoidants thrive in emotional distance. They think the avoidant prefers space, prefers solitude, prefers detachment. But the truth is far more complex and a lot more human. Because when an avoidant is secretly in love with you, your absence doesn't bring them peace, it brings them pressure. Not the kind they can acknowledge out loud, but the kind that builds in the quiet, grows in the dark, and ultimately erupts in behavior they can't even explain to themselves. Here's the reality. Avoidants don't always recognize they're in love when they're with you. They feel something, but they don't trust it. Their guard is up. Their nervous system is scanning for danger, not desire. But the moment you go silent, not out of punishment, but out of self-respect, something changes. You remove the stimulus, you stop initiating, you stop chasing. And for the first time, they're left alone with what you left behind, your impact. This is where it gets psychological. Avoidants rely on external distance to regulate internal fear. They believe space is safety. But what happens when space stops feeling safe and starts feeling like loss? That's when everything shifts. When your silence becomes louder than your presence, they begin to panic. Not outwardly, not in some dramatic display, but inwardly, in a slow, invisible breakdown. Their thoughts become preoccupied. Their sleep gets interrupted. Their usual distractions, work, routine, detachment, stop being enough. They'll start checking your social media without engaging, reading your messages, asking mutual friends about you casually but with the tension in their voice. They'll convince themselves they're just curious, but what they're really doing is tracking the wound. Because love for the avoidant shows up like a delayed injury. It doesn't hit in real time. It hits when the connection disappears, when the supply of validation, presence, and emotional grounding is suddenly gone. That's when their subconscious registers, you mattered. Now here's what's wild. They don't always act on it immediately. They sit in it. They stew in it. They try to suppress it. But you'll know they're breaking down when their behavior becomes inconsistent. One day they seem cold again. The next, they're showing up in subtle ways, liking a post, texting, hope you're good, asking mutual friends how you're doing. And even if they don't reach out at all, something inside them is unraveling. And that unraveling is emotional evidence. See, the avoidant's biggest secret is that they don't fear being alone. They fear being known and then left. So when you go silent, you trigger that exact nightmare, not because you're being manipulative, but because you finally stopped making yourself emotionally available. And that void forces them to confront the truth. You weren't just another connection. You were the one who made them feel seen. And now that you're gone, their identity feels unstable. There's a philosophical depth to this too, because silence is one of the most powerful forces in human connection. It's not just absence, it's a mirror. And when an avoidant is left alone with your silence, they're not just missing you. They're finally meeting themselves. They're meeting the part of them that's scared, the part that's lonely, the part that's still carrying wounds from long before you ever showed up. And when that internal meeting happens, something profound emerges. They begin to long for you in a way that terrifies them, not because you're gone, but because you left something behind. You left a mark on their emotional system. You cracked the armor. And now, every time they sit in silence, they're reminded of what they tried to avoid, connection. Not just any connection, yours. And so what do? You hold the line. You don't break the silence just because they're struggling to cope with it. Let them feel what they are too afraid to admit. Let them come to terms with their own inner chaos. Because when you go silent and they begin to break down, that's not cruelty, that's clarity. That's consequence. That's the mirror showing them exactly what they've been running from, real intimacy. And here's the final truth. Avoidants don't always confess love with words. Sometimes their breakdown in your absence is the loudest confession you'll ever get. Let it echo. Let it teach you. Let it remind you. If your silence drives them deeper into themselves, you were never noise. You were their awakening. Do you ever notice how someone who once seemed completely uninterested suddenly starts showing up when you're no longer trying to be seen? That's not coincidence. That's a psychological shift. It's one of the clearest signs an avoidant is catching feelings they can no longer outrun. And here's the paradox. Avoidants don't chase love when they feel safe. They chase it when they start to fear they've lost it. That's when everything changes. At first, avoidants seem indifferent, even emotionally numb. They pull back, create space, give short responses, and seem unbothered by your absence. You think they've moved on. You think it never mattered. But here's what's really going on behind that detachment. They're watching. They're calculating. And most importantly, they're waiting for control to return. They assume you'll reach out again. They assume you'll bend, but the longer you stay silent, the more uncertain they become, and uncertainty is the one thing they can't regulate through distance. Emotionally avoidant people don't operate from a place of openness, they operate from protection. Their feelings show up not when it's safe, but when their emotional world feels threatened. And make no mistake, when you stop chasing, when you stop explaining, when you no longer orbit around their energy, that creates an emotional vacuum. And that vacuum, that's where their real feelings begin to surface. This is where the behavior flips. They might not reach out directly at first, but they begin showing up in strange, seemingly small ways. Watching your stories, but not saying anything. Liking old posts, commenting something vague, maybe sending a just checking in text with no follow-up. And that's not nothing. That's testing the water. That's them checking if the door is still cracked open. See, when an avoidant starts realizing you're not just another person trying to get love from them, you're someone who removed your energy, they don't just miss you, They respect you. On a subconscious level, they begin to perceive your withdrawal as value. You're no longer feeding their fear-driven narrative that love equals entrapment. Instead, you're showing them that you can choose yourself, with or without them. And this forces a question they don't want to answer. Why does your distance bother me if I didn't care? That single question is where love starts to bloom, not in comfort, but in conflict, in internal disruption. And that's why they start showing up, not because they suddenly decided to love you, but because their emotional system is realizing it already happened. And now they're scared to lose it. This is not about playing games. It's about energetic realignment. When you stop pouring into someone who can't receive love, you create the space for them to feel their own emotional hunger. And if they're truly connected to you, that hunger becomes unbearable. They start reaching out, asking how you've been, mentioning memories they claim not to care about, talking about random things just to keep you responding. Don't miss this. These are emotional breadcrumbs dropped by someone who's terrified of being direct. Avoidants are emotionally indirect by nature. They won't always say, I miss you, but they'll start saying, I had a dream about you, or I heard this song and thought of you. That's emotional code. That's them trying to connect without exposing their vulnerability. They're not testing you, they're testing safety. They want to know, if I show up again, will you make me feel? Will I lose control? You have to recognize that real love for the avoidant starts when they fear they've lost it. That's when they're willing to risk rejection. That's when they step out of hiding, not because they're brave, but because emotional absence broke the illusion that they didn't care. And once that illusion breaks, they have to choose, continue avoiding or finally engage. At your moment of clarity, not because they're suddenly healed, but because they're finally honest. And that honesty is rare. It comes at the cost of their comfort. It comes when the distance you created forces them to feel what they were too guarded to face. So when an avoidant starts showing up after silence, don't just hear their words. Watch their pattern. Feel the shift. Because if they're making contact, not from a place of convenience, but from vulnerability, you're witnessing one of the few moments where fear gave way to feeling. When your absence begins to pull them in, it's no longer a chase, it's gravity. And gravity doesn't lie. Let's talk about the most overlooked sign of all, the subtle shift in how they talk about relationships in general. This is where most people miss it, because they're looking for grand gestures, clear confessions, or some dramatic emotional revelation. But with an avoidant, love doesn't shout. It whispers through changes in perspective, the way they speak about connection, the way they question their old beliefs, the way they suddenly start talking about things they used to dismiss. That's where you see the truth. When someone is emotionally avoidant, they typically armor their language. They speak about relationships as burdens, obligations, traps. They'll use phrases like, I don't believe in forever, or I just don't do emotions. Not because they're heartless, but because they've learned to intellectualize love instead of feel it. Their language is their shield. Their philosophy is their hiding place. But something starts to shift when they're secretly in love. At first, they don't even realize it's happening, but suddenly they're asking different questions. They're not just talking about being single or avoiding drama. They're mentioning things like stability. They're entertaining the idea of companionship. They might reference a healthy couple they admire when before they would have rolled their eyes. And they'll bring it up casually, like it's no big deal. But it is. It's a huge deal because you're not just hearing words, you're hearing the cracks in the armor. This is the part that fascinates me because it reveals something deeper. Emotional growth is often heard before it's seen. You'll notice they're no longer mocking vulnerability. They're curious about it. They might even ask about your past relationships or what love means to you or how you knew when someone truly cared. Not because they're trying to manipulate you, but because something inside them is waking up. And when the avoidant begins to question their own story about love, that's the clearest sign something real is happening. They'll still mask it. They'll still say, I'm just wondering, or it's interesting how people think that way. But underneath that is a trembling heart, finally allowing itself to wonder, what if I've been wrong? What if connection isn't the threat I thought it was? That inner questioning is the beginning of transformation. Because once you question your defense, the defense starts to lose its power. Now, they might not tell you outright that they're thinking of you when they say these things, but if you listen closely, you'll hear the emotional fingerprints. They're not just talking about relationships in the abstract. They're recalibrating how they understand love because you made them feel something they couldn't ignore. And here's the real beauty of it. When an avoidant shifts their language, they're not just learning about you, they're unlearning their fear. That is not a small thing. That is emotional evolution. That is spiritual surgery. That's years of protective patterns beginning to unravel, all because someone, you, came into their life and showed them that love doesn't have to mean losing themselves. It can mean finally finding themselves in the presence of someone safe. That's why your role is not to force the confession, not to demand clarity, but to observe the shift, to see how their vocabulary starts matching your value. And that's rare, because when an avoidant speaks differently, they are different. Not fully healed, not perfectly ready, but more honest, more open, more aware that maybe, just maybe, love isn't the enemy. It's the answer they've been avoiding all along. So next time you hear them talk about relationships in a way they never did before, don't dismiss it as small talk. Don't overlook it because it wasn't dramatic. That shift is them stepping out of survival mode into curiosity, into reflection, into love. Because when the language of fear turns into the language of hope, that's not just a sign they're changing. It's proof you've already changed them.